Most people believe their reactions are simply who they are. That when anger rises fast or words come out before thought catches up, that's just their personality. That's just how they're wired. And there is something almost comforting about that idea. If it's just who you are, then it's not really your fault. You didn't choose it, it chose you. But there is a quieter truth underneath that comfort. What feels natural in the moment is often the mind choosing short-term relief over long-term control. The sharp reply that defends pride, the shutdown that protects from pain, the outburst that releases pressure, only to create more of it. Niccolo Machiavelli, writing in a world of courts and power and shifting alliances, observed something that has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the person standing in front of a mirror. Those who master themselves gain a quiet advantage over those who don't, not because self-mastery makes them invincible, but because the greatest victories in rooms, in relationships, in private moments no one else sees, rarely come from strength. They come from the discipline to wait before acting. This episode is about that wait and why it is so difficult to hold. There is a person who, by most accounts, handles things well. They are dependable at work, thoughtful with friends, the kind of person others describe as level-headed, and they believe it mostly, because most of the time it is true. But then there are the other moments. A comment from a coworker that lands wrong, a small dismissal in a meeting, nothing major, just a slight, and something shifts, not loudly. The reaction doesn't announce itself. It comes as a tightening in the chest, a clipped response, a sudden need to prove a point that probably didn't need proving. Later in the car or in the quiet of the evening, they replay it. Not because the moment was catastrophic, but because they can see clearly now, in the stillness, that they responded from somewhere other than the version of themselves they want to be. They were moved when they didn't want to be moved. And the frustrating part isn't the reaction itself. It's that they knew, even in the moment, that it was happening. They could feel themselves rising, and still the reaction came. This is the discomfort that doesn't get talked about enough, not the big explosions, but the small, private ones, the ones that leave you asking, why couldn't I just hold it? Here is a reframe worth sitting with. The struggle to control a reaction is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that something is broken in you. It is evidence that you are human and that certain things matter to you deeply enough to move you. Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most of us prefer not to look at directly. He did not believe that people were fundamentally good or fundamentally bad. He believed they were fundamentally responsive to reward, to threat, to the unspoken rules of the environments they inhabited. People act, he observed, not from pure reason but from the push and pull of appetite and fear, and the ever-present need to protect what they've built, including the image of themselves that they carry into every room. That understanding does not flatter us, but it is more useful than the alternative. Because we are not fundamentally rational creatures who occasionally feel things, we are feeling creatures who occasionally pause to think. The emotion comes first, the thought arrives second, and the gap between the two, that small, invisible window, is where everything is decided. What happened in that meeting wasn't weakness. It was the mind doing what minds do, responding to perceived threat with whatever is fastest. The coworker's comment landed as a dismissal. The self defended. The reaction was the defense. That is the mechanism, not a moral failure, a mechanism. And once you understand it as a mechanism, you can begin to look at it differently. You can approach it not with the familiar heaviness of self-judgment, but with something closer to genuine curiosity, because judgment closes the door. Curiosity opens it. The same person who stays composed in one room falls apart in another. The same person who laughs off criticism from a stranger can be leveled by a single sentence from someone they love. That inconsistency isn't hypocrisy, it's information. It tells you where the investment is. It tells you which places still hold old agreements about your worth. You can ask the question not with shame, but with genuine curiosity. What was being protected in that moment? What did the dismissal threaten that made the defense feel necessary? The question is not, why did you react? The question is, what does the reaction reveal about what you are still protecting? That is a different kind of question. It doesn't indict you, it invites you to look. Now consider the pattern over time. It is rarely random, is it? The reactions don't appear everywhere with everyone in all situations. They appear in specific places, with specific people, around specific themes. The person who stays composed in professional settings but loses composure at home. The one who can take criticism from a stranger but falls apart when it comes from someone they love. The one who is endlessly patient with everyone except the people who need their patience most. There is a geometry to it. Sit with that for a moment. Think about the last time a reaction caught you off guard, the last time you responded in a way that surprised even yourself. And then think about the time before that, and the time before that. Were they different situations, or were they the same situation in different clothing? A different person, a different setting, but the same wound being touched in the same way. Most of us, if we're honest, can trace a line. The theme doesn't change much. The trigger shifts its costume but keeps its shape. And underneath it, if you trace that geometry long enough, you find something that isn't just emotion, something older than the emotion, a belief. A story about what it means when this particular thing happens, what it says about your value, your place, whether you are respected or seen or safe. Machiavelli wrote about the maintenance of appearances, not as vanity, but as a survival strategy in a world where perception carries real consequence. He understood that the fear of being seen as weak is often more powerful than weakness itself. People go to extraordinary lengths to avoid looking diminished in the eyes of others, and even in the eyes of themselves. What if the reactions that feel most uncontrollable are the ones tied to the places where your image of yourself feels most fragile? Not the places where you are weak, the places where you are afraid to appear weak. There is a difference, and that difference matters. This is where the pattern begins to make sense. The reactions that hijack us most completely are almost never about the surface event. The clipped response in the meeting wasn't really about the coworker's comment. It was about something the comment touched, a sensitivity that was already there, waiting. Something that had been sitting quietly beneath the surface of that particular interaction, and of many interactions before it. Machiavelli, writing centuries before the language of psychology existed, described this phenomenon in practical terms. The person who cannot master their impulses will always be mastered by circumstance, not because they are weak-willed, but because unexamined patterns run on automatic. They don't wait for your permission. They don't check whether the moment is appropriate. They fire because they've been trained to fire, and no one ever gave them a different instruction. The mechanism looks like this. Something external happens. A comment, a tone, a gesture, a silence. It lands on something internal, a wound, a fear, a belief about yourself that you carry without quite knowing you're carrying it. The nervous system reads it as threat before the conscious mind has even registered what happened. The response fires, and by the time you're aware of what's occurring, you're already in it. That is not a moral failure. That is a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do. But here is what changes when you understand it. You stop blaming yourself for the reaction and you start getting curious about the belief underneath it. Because the reaction is just the surface. It's the visible part of something much older. Maybe the belief is that being overlooked means you don't matter. Maybe it's that when someone raises their voice, it means danger. Maybe it's that criticism, even mild, even well-intentioned, means you've failed at the thing you most need to get right. These beliefs were formed somewhere, in a childhood home, in a classroom, in a relationship that left a mark. They made sense in the context where they were born, and then that context changed, but the belief stayed, still running its old program in new rooms. The reaction is not who you are. It is what you learned to do when that kind of moment appeared. And becoming aware of the belief doesn't dissolve it overnight. That would be too easy and also not how people actually work. But awareness changes the relationship. You stop being fully inside the reaction, absorbed by it, carried by it, and you begin to be able to observe it, even slightly, even a half second after it happens. You catch yourself mid-sentence and recognize, this is the old thing. This is not actually about now. That observation, that fraction of distance, is not a small thing. It is the beginning of something real. Because in that space between the trigger and the response, that window that Machiavelli implicitly understood and that modern psychology has mapped extensively, there is room. Not always, not in every moment, but more often than before. And in that room, a different choice becomes possible, not a perfect choice, not a choice made from some idealized version of yourself, just a slightly more considered one, a choice that belongs to today rather than to the old story. There is a particular kind of person who works very hard on this. They read, they reflect. They've done the inner work of understanding their patterns, where the reactions come from, what they're protecting, what the old story is. They practice pausing. They remind themselves in calm moments of who they want to be when the heat comes. They are genuinely committed to responding differently, and sometimes they succeed. They feel the charge rising and they breathe through it. They let the moment pass. They choose not to speak until the clarity arrives. They are proud of that, and they should be. That kind of effort is real. And then there are the other days. The days when something finds exactly the right nerve at exactly the wrong moment, when the resources are low, the patience is thin, the wound is closer to the surface than usual. And all the awareness, all the practice, all the careful intention isn't enough. The reaction comes anyway, and in its wake, the feeling isn't just regret. It's something sharper, the sense that all that work, all that effort, ultimately changed nothing. This is the quiet truth that most conversations about emotional regulation leave out. Mastery is not linear. It does not accumulate the way you hope it does. You do not get better in a clean upward line and then stay there. You get better. And then life finds the old nerve. And you are back in a familiar place, wondering if the progress was real at all. But here is what is true, and it requires sitting with because it doesn't feel immediately consoling. The gap you feel after a difficult moment, the gap between who you wanted to be and who you were, is itself evidence of awareness. A version of you from years ago would not have felt that gap. They would have walked away convinced the reaction was justified or simply not thought about it at all. The fact that you can see it, even after the fact, even in the quiet of the following day, is the work. The gap is not proof you haven't changed. The gap is proof you're paying attention. Machiavelli's most misunderstood idea is not about cunning or cruelty. It is about clear-eyed honesty regarding human nature. He believed plainly, without sentimentality, that human beings are moved by forces they often cannot name. Appetite, fear, pride, the deep and constant need to be recognized as significant. He did not believe these forces made people bad. He believed that ignoring them made people vulnerable. That the person who builds their self-image on the idea that they are above such things will always be blindsided when those things move through them anyway, because they move through everyone. The person who says, "I am not an emotional person," is not freer from emotion. They are simply less honest about it, which means the emotion operates without acknowledgement, without the small pauses that awareness allows, without any possibility of influence. It runs beneath the surface, unsupervised, shaping choices that feel rational but are driven by the same appetites and fears as everyone else's. Genuine self-governance, what Machiavelli might have recognized as the most demanding and most consequential form of power, is not the suppression of feeling. It is the honest reckoning with feeling, the willingness to look at what moves you and to ask without flinching, is this response serving the person I am trying to be, or is it serving a fear I have never named? That question is not comfortable, but it is clarifying. You react because something matters to you. You react sharply when that something feels threatened. The reaction is not evidence of dysfunction, it is evidence of investment, of caring, of being a person who is present enough to be moved by things. What changes over time, not from a single insight, not from a conversation like this one, but slowly, through many small moments of honest observation, is not the absence of reaction. It is the relationship to it. You begin to feel the early signs. You begin to recognize the specific shape your particular triggers take. You begin to give yourself a beat, not always, not in every circumstance, but more often than before. And in that beat, something fundamental shifts. You are no longer only the person reacting. You are also the person watching the reaction, curious about it, not consumed by it. And that observer, once it becomes even slightly reliable, changes everything. Not because it stops the reaction, but because it means the reaction is no longer the last word. There is something worth acknowledging here. This kind of awareness doesn't make you detached. It doesn't turn you into someone who floats above their feelings, untouched and clinical. That is not the goal, and it is not possible, and it is probably not even desirable. The goal is not to feel less. The goal is to have a fraction more choice in how the feeling moves through you and what you do while it does. Machiavelli would have understood that distinction. He was not describing a person without passion. He was describing a person who had learned to hold their passion long enough to direct it, to let it inform without letting it dictate. That is a different kind of strength than the kind most people imagine when they think about controlling themselves. It is quieter, less dramatic, but it lasts longer. You are capable of more than your fastest response. You always have been. The work is simply learning, again and again, imperfectly, across a whole lifetime, to reach for that capacity in the moments that matter most. Why do you struggle to control your reactions? Because you are not a machine that processes events neutrally. You are a person who has been shaped by experience, by the specific rooms you grew up in, the specific people who formed you, the specific moments that left their mark, into someone who cares about certain things in certain ways, more than you might have chosen if you had been given a choice. The reactions are not the enemy, they are the message. And the question is not how to silence them, it is whether you are willing to hear what they are saying. There is no system for this, no 5 steps, no guarantee that understanding becomes change on any predictable schedule. But there is this: the moment you stop seeing your reactions as evidence of what is wrong with you and start seeing them as information about what is alive in you, something shifts. Not loudly, not all at once, quietly, the way most real things change. You were not built to be unmoved. You were built to feel and to reckon with what you feel and to grow over time imperfectly, honestly, into someone who can hold themselves with a little more care. That is enough. That has always been enough.